Good morning. Nice to see you on this stormy morning. Hard to tell it's a morning. This actually reminds me a little bit. I saw Steve Hagen give a talk in Duluth quite a few years ago, and it was, I think, evening, and a big storm was raging outside. And he was just about to start, and he was being introduced. The person introducing him said, and tonight we have Steve Hagen, and then boom, there's this big crash of lightning. It's like, there you go, exactly. Needed to do my introduction right before that big thunderclap. It's pretty dramatic. It was a good talk too, so. Every once in a while, you may run across parables from Buddhism that particularly show up in some of the earliest Buddhist writings. So you get sort of stories equating a certain teaching. And I've run across this one at least a couple times. It's the parable of two darts or two arrows. And this one showed up in a little bit of a different way. So I thought that there were some interesting elements that were brought out in this particular story. So I thought I'd present it here today. And I wanted to introduce this parable in combination with another Zen text called the Shin Shin Ming. That's the trusting the heart mind. That text, trusting the heart mind, is from, I believe, about the 6th century China. So we got a couple ancient teachings here side by side. One is older than the other, but the Shin Shin Ming, the trusting the heart mind, was written by the third ancestor, Sang San. So I'll be weaving together some quotes from this trusting the heart mind along with some of these earlier teachings of this parable. And then finally, at the end, I have a quote from another sutra, the Vimalakirti Sutra. So I'll be weaving those together. So this parable of the two darts or two arrows is a way of exemplifying how we often, the human kind of condition arises in certain ways where we will experience something and then there'll be interpretation that follows that. So the first arrow basically signifies just a simple experience, and it could be anything, basically, anything that happens to us. In this particular parable, we can see that since it's a dart, it's kind of showing an example of something that's happening that's painful, obviously. And then the Buddha talked about the second arrow, which we often do, and that encompasses interpretation. So you have the simple experience and then the interpretation or valuation that comes along with that. The opinions that we have, the idea of how we would maybe like it to be different, which is for sure the case with painful situations. The Buddha also talked about, and this is the thing that kind of piqued my interest a bit, is that this second arrow, again, it would be our interpretation of what's happening. And then that shows up with leaning of mind, and it shows up often as aversion. So it's something that is something that we want to go away. And the point that is made in this particular parable is that the Buddha is saying that we often want to replace that situation with something pleasurable, which I think is pretty illuminating. I think it is reflective of something that happens pretty much universally something bad happens and we're averse to it, and then we want to actually replace it with something that's satisfactory to us. And then the Buddha goes on and says, the uninstructed person does not know of freedom from a painful feeling other than a sensual pleasure or something positive. And I think this is a pretty profound statement. Maybe seems kind of straightforward when you think about it, but essentially this is the methodology that humanity has used throughout the ages. Something bad happens, and the only option we have is to try to replace it. Very natural. That's kind of the emotion that we have. We want to change it into something that we feel is good, take the bad out and replace it with something that's good. And then the Buddha continues a bit and he says that there's a misunderstanding here. And then he explains that the uninstructed person does not know about impermanence. So they're failing to see the impermanent nature of what's going on. The Buddha also says that we fail to see that we're trying to switch out this good with bad. We also fail to see that that actually doesn't work. And then finally, he says that the person, the uninstructed person, doesn't know that there is a different way, doesn't know that there is actually a path that does work. So that's all wrapped up in this pretty simple parable. There's a line from the Xinsheng Ming that I thought blended very nicely with what we're looking at here. I think it helps to clarify a few things too. That line from the Xinsheng Ming is, when our thought is fettered, it turns from truth. It is dark, heavy, unclear. So this thought that is fettered is referring to that second arrow where we're, the simple experience is happening, but then the interpretation and the valuation comes up, and that's this fettered thought. And so basically I looked up the term fettered because I thought that that was helpful in terms of understanding this particular line. It refers to chains are being bound. So I think this line is helpful in understanding that the thought itself is not the problem. It's that we're unnecessarily binding ourselves to the interpretation. So the thought can show up, but then we are invested in it, and therefore it becomes a fetter. So when our thought is fettered, it is dark, heavy, and unclear. Then it goes on and says, the burdensome practice of judging brings annoyance and weariness. And here, this is, I think, even a deepening of this same understanding. So it says the burdensome practice of judging. And here, I think we can see that analogy with that second arrow, judging, that second arrow of interpretation, judging, evaluation of the simple experience, the leaning of mind. It very naturally brings annoyance and weariness. So maybe something happens and we interpret it as something negative, something undesirable, and a weariness comes up. And I think it's pretty normal to associate the weariness, or we link weariness with what we think the situation is. But here, I think this is a powerful statement. It's reminding us that the weariness is not necessarily whether we think something is good or bad. The weariness is traced right back to the burdensome practice of judging. So to really understand where what suffering is, we uh, are getting closer to that understanding by knowing that this practice of judging is the source of that discontent. So in understanding that, I think this ties back to what the Buddha was saying about um, our desire, our thoughts, our valuations. They don't actually work. And I feel that maybe if we're not even really too familiar with Buddhism, we can probably sense that the weariness that we feel is coming about because we know that this judging doesn't actually help. Of course, as we study Buddhism more, we can become more familiar with um, just experience itself, to understand how the leaning of mind comes about, and to really feel that our usual methodology of trying to um, interpret things, change things is not a solution. It doesn't actually work. So I think one angle to look at this is that we're often battling a relative sense, a relative understanding, or different components of a relative understanding. So you have valuation, preferences, good and bad, desirable, undesirable. And there's a lot of different ways of looking at this and how we can get kind of bound up in that. And it makes sense that, that wouldn't, um, if we continue just along that path of trying to judge and so forth, it doesn't work because those relative aspects are so often shifting. Um, maybe we'll find something that we like, but we find that it never satisfies. There'll always be something a little bit better. We may be temporarily satisfied. Our situation changes, our perspective changes. Sometimes what we thought was good becomes bad. It's this whole kind of shifting ground of relative understanding. So we can never really find our footing in terms of understanding what relief from suffering is. One image came to my mind is we were in the Boundary Waters a few weeks ago, just maybe a bit of an illustration of good and bad and how that sort of shifts, and it's not always what we think it is. When you are paddling or you're hiking, oftentimes wind is one of the most kind of substantial issues that can arise. It can portend bad weather to come. Wind when you're out paddling can be difficult, obviously, if you're going upwind, and then it presents a pretty serious situation sometimes if you're in waves. If you're overturning and the water's cold, it could be a pretty serious situation. Of course, wind brings cold, it sort of accentuates the cold that might be happening too. In this last trip that we're up in the Boundary Waters, the one thing that we are really hoping for was wind, because the mosquitoes were horrible. If you've been out camping, particularly kind of in open space a little bit, maybe next to a lake or something, you'll notice that when you got a nice breeze there, it's too strong for the mosquitoes to stick around. So what was normally a bad thing, we're hoping for that, helps to keep the bugs away. We brought our dog up there for the first time too, so it was providing a little bit of cooling. The extra wind was providing cooling for the dog. And we find this particular teaching in the Trusting the Heart Mind, Shin Shin Ming as well. It says, object is object for the subject. Subject is subject for the object. And this particular piece was written at a time when Buddhism was developing in China, and there's strong influence from Taoism. So I think you can kind of see that in this particular line here. Object is object for the subject. So if you've seen the symbol of the yin yang, where it's the dark and light in the circle swirling together, here this line I think is helping us to understand that object is object for the subject. I mean, you could see this in many different ways, but in this particular situation, I think here, when we see good and bad, they're very dependent. They're completely dependent on each other. And also they can shift too. Our interpretation can shift. Hot, cold. If I'm trying to think, maybe an example of if you step outside in a certain temperature, maybe it's 60 degrees when it's summer and it seems cool, but in the winter it's, step into a room that's 60 degrees, it could be very warm if you're stepping in from -20 outside. So that subject and object are playing with each other, or they're tethered together. They're of the same fabric, basically. And the Shin Ming goes on and says, the thoroughgoing relativity of these two is originally one emptiness. And that is the backdrop in which the Buddha is presenting this parable, saying that, if we can take a close look at this second arrow, this interpretation side of thing, and understand how our fragmented view of reality is limited to that relative aspect, and then we may, have a chance to see that this thoroughgoing relativity, basically, the relative world showing up in its full display is actually one emptiness, but we're just confused about what it is. If we can settle our mind, collect our mind, and come back to this moment, we present ourselves with the opportunity to see totality, or totality can be revealed just of its own. So this first dart is immediate, and then the second aspect arises. And as I was saying, if we slow down a bit and watch our mind, I think we can see the second dart, the interpretation, come up in many different situations. It's almost kind of like the suffering that arises is almost like a speed bump that you don't notice. You're just kind of driving along, and then all of a sudden, bam, it's completely annoying. And it's because we're not paying attention. We never saw it coming. Maybe we don't even know what it was. And then that second arrow shows up, why was it there? I didn't want that to happen. Hopefully it doesn't happen. But we're failing to see that also our kind of background sort of direction is that we're focused on the future. We want something out there. We're driving along. We're going for something else. We're kind of maybe speeding up, trying to get what we want. So this practice is just to really pay attention and stay here. See this, again, this leaning of mind that happens. Another line from the Shin Shin Ming here says, by our accepting and rejecting we lose sight of the true nature of things. And the true nature of things, again, is a reference to this relative world showing up as originally one emptiness. It also says, be serene in the oneness of things, and confusion will vanish of its own accord. I think this is a line that points us back to really being here for whatever's happening, including the arrow, the arrows that are seem to be happening, the simple experience of dissatisfactory things. Just be here and take care of those. That's what I think is being suggested in that line. There's another important line I thought was helpful here. It says, indeed, not hating the world of the senses is identical with true enlightenment. So particularly some of these teachings that came about, Zen tradition teachings, can have like a real strength in reminding us that interpretation and valuation and judgment is not necessarily bad, or it isn't bad. So here it says, not hating the world of the senses is identical with true enlightenment. So maybe we get the sense that the second arrow is sort of problematic and we need to get rid of thinking or valuation or judgment. But the Buddha was pointing out that, or he's presenting this particular parable in hopes of helping practitioners just to see what's going on. It's not about trying to manipulate our situation or control what's happening, but to actually see the quality or see this human situation and what our tendencies are, and how, if we're doing something that actually is not helping, that we actually understand what that is. And so it's not a practice of like, I need to stop what's not working. It's just in realizing what doesn't work, we very naturally will discontinue that particular activity. And of course, this, I think, is this kind of this nature of a gentle practice is something that it shows up in meditation, basically, in that whether you sit down and have what seems like a scattered mind or a calm experience, it really does not matter. There's no good or bad meditation. So we have the same type of inflection and understanding that judging our practice is also not helpful too. We're just, again, speaking of seeing through good and bad and actually coming back to the simple experience. And evaluating meditation is not helpful at all. It's kind of, well, I mean, probably a clear understanding, something that I think, understood over the years. A clearer understanding of meditation is basically that you're living life. That's what meditation is. So we can bring this mindfulness to any type of activity that's happening. And in that sense, when we begin to see mindfulness, meditation, that the spirit of what that is, if we can really understand that, we'll understand it as truly living our life. And from that understanding, I think it does become perhaps more clear that, what is the point of evaluating anything. You know, if we are just making an effort to fully live our life, adding some sort of narration to that doesn't really make sense at all. You know, meditation is just to live fully. So saying it's good or bad is sort of besides the point. It's just fully life. That's what it is. You know, it could be any type of situation. If, you know, lightning strikes a nearby shed and it starts on fire, you know, that's what the life situation is. Sitting there and saying, you know, that's bad is, you know, you could do that. I mean, it's basically it's life. You just take care of what's happening. You know, you try to put out the fire. You try to tend to life as best that you can. The Buddha also said that the instructed um, noble disciple or the one with sound understanding knows freedom from suffering other than sensual pleasure. So again, back to this tendency to, you know, simple experience is there, and then there's a preference. We'll want to replace it with something positive. But then the Buddha says, if that practitioner of sound understanding feels a experience, there's a unattached. They are unattached. And then also mentions that it could be either negative or positive. So the Buddha is pointing out that regardless of where we might be in terms of, you know, any type of judgment about what's happening, there can be this even-mindedness. The Shin Ming says, obeying the nature of things, we are in accord with the way, wandering freely without annoyance. And I think this is the same teaching as the Buddha. So wandering freely without annoyance is to be with simple experience, regardless of maybe, you know, we would think of it as something desirable or undesirable, pleasant or unpleasant. And that I always like to kind of remind or reiterate that this is not about blankness or unfeeling. We're actually talking about fully living life. So whatever the experience is, we can fully experience that. Judgment isn't helping at all in terms of actually fully feeling what life is. So we're not talking about squelching anything or diminishing anything, but to understand experience as it is and to understand this wandering freely without annoyance. The Shin Ming also says in relation to this aspect of the practice not being about just blanking out your mind or being unfeeling, the Shin Ming says, banish reality and you fall into it. So, you know, if we have the understanding that we're going to sort of block something out or stop something, or we're trying to be unfeeling, that would be this banishing reality. And in doing so, we just fall deeper into that relative view of things. So it's that side, banish reality, and you fall into it. But then also the Shin Ming says, do not remain in the relative view of things. Avoid such pursuits carefully. And again, this is a teaching, I think, for us to just look closely at our life to see how this relative perspective really can come up pretty quickly for us, you know, in many different ways. So it says, do not remain in the relative view of things, avoid such pursuits carefully. Um, and this, I think, also is related to what that earlier line was saying. Um, I can find it here again about the nature of things, the true nature of things is to understand what relative reality is. So we may ask ourselves, the Buddha is saying that something unpleasant happens and we normally want to sort of change that, find something that we like and replace it. And very naturally, I think we'll like ask ourselves, well, what do we do then? And it's nothing more than keeping the practice very simple. I think we find this in meditation instruction, where the most simple and direct way is kind of what Zen is always recommending to us. If sitting meditation, we're just following the breath. And for our life, it's just to collect our mind, no matter what the situation is, and collect our mind, take care of what's happening, do one thing at a time, just what is right in front of us. Just return to this presence of what's happening. And I think an even-mindedness can kind of just arise right out of that simple practice. So we're not looking for perfection or even trying to fix anything. That would be, I think, to add more complexity. If we're, if an idea of it needs to be look or feel some way, or my sitting meditation, it just seems like there's stress and tension. It doesn't seem like that's the ideal type of meditation, but really that's, if we can notice that as just a version of looking for a specific kind of perfection or trying to fix something, that's perfectly fine. In noticing that, right when we notice it, we're back right in that moment. And we can be here and take care of our life as it's happening, this simple experience. So pretty normal for, for us to want to change things or fix things or make them better. Something that's, I think, it's just part of humanity, basically. It's something we've been doing for thousands of years, but there's a story of the Buddha. I think we may have heard about his quest for enlightenment and what he went through. And you can certainly see a sense of striving for his earlier stage and when he was trying to find the source of suffering in his practice of asceticism, where he almost starved himself to death. He was striving and straining to a degree that I don't think any of us could probably even understand. But he recalled a moment when he was a young boy, and this is a situation where his father was kind of off handling some other situation. So the young Buddha was sitting next to a field quietly under this rose apple tree, and sort of just a quietude settled in for him, just a kind of peace of mind. And at this particular time in the Buddha's life, he was just coming out of this, really striving to understand what the human condition is. And he said, "Why am I afraid of this happiness?" As he recalled this experience as a young boy. And he said, I am not afraid of this happiness. He sort of realized that, in that moment, he or any of us, man or woman, we can have this type of understanding where we realize that the striving and the straining or judging our meditation is it's something that we can actually just very gently set aside, or just watch that and will naturally set that aside, knowing that this calm can just arise of its own accord. And the Buddha recommended to his practitioners, and this kind of goes back to that parable of the two arrows. He recommended that practitioners dwell diligent, ardent, and resolute in their practice. So it's a bit of encouragement, for our practice, but also in our daily life to remain here in this moment. It could be a difficult situation, some sort of challenging scenario that we might be in, but we can encourage ourselves to do that. He also said, even though this pleasant feeling can arise, this example of him sitting next to a field, it doesn't need to be something that we attach to. So, calmness can be a part of practice, but certainly if we become attached or think that that's the goal, that can be a problem as well. This provides another barrier for us. So I think the Buddha here, in simple terms, is just that we're recommencing what's happening right now. Again, we're just collecting our mind in this moment. We're just breathing into this moment by moment, step by step. Very simple practice. I wanted to finish up kind of with just a last segment here that I thought would be important. Another critical or very important part of the Buddha's teachings, particularly if we're thinking about the relative world or interpretation, is that we understand where that's coming from. And to understand where that's coming from, we have to investigate a little bit our sense of inside and outside. If we're looking at good and bad, maybe we like some things or we don't like some things. This is all based on ideas of a fragmented world. And the quote from the Vimalakirti here struck me in a certain way, in that it seems like it really gets to that. In the sutra, it says, external disturbance and inner thinking are a duality. When disturbance subsides, thinking comes to an end. So in other words, this particular line here, I think, is really helpful in understanding our notion of the world being a certain way, permanent things, this and that. Of course, we're basing our sense of what I want, what I don't want, on this kind of objectification of the world. And to reflect on that a bit, the sutra is basically saying that if the notion of inside and outside were to drop away, then essentially there's no basis for valuation or churning through the thinking. That really is a deep aspect of the Buddha's message. I think there could be a bit of a problem, because then we'll think, okay, it's not like that then, so how else is it? We'll try to sort of come up with some other philosophy. If we hear about insubstantiality, it's just kind of like, okay, then how else is it? But this is a type of teaching that is just simply saying that, it's speaking to the nature of grasping and thinking. And I think it's helpful to know that the basis of thinking is, it's related to the sense of substance in the world. And there's no way to really stop believing, one thing or another, whether it's substantiality or whatever. it's important to remind ourselves that we're not coming up for another philosophy. This is about paying attention to simple experience. And if we slow down a bit and just notice, the sound of the rain, just the sound of the room and my voice, that we don't need any philosophy, you know, for this happening to work as it does. So that's what this statement is saying. It's not saying, believe something else or try to stop thinking. It's just simply helping us understand that permanence, this is why non-substantiality, not self, are part of Buddhism, is that it helps us understand what's happening with thinking. And I think also can help us come back to the importance of practice itself, just actually dedicating ourselves to this simple practice and not, not needing to, again, land on some other idea of what, some other philosophy or whatever, or thinking that we're trying to stop thinking or anything along those lines. It's just to understand to truly know what thinking is, and to know that it's related to notions of permanence. The Shin Ming says, if there is the slightest trace of this and that, the mind is lost in confusion. So same type of teaching here. The world of this and that. The Buddha was saying that this is something to pay attention to, because the amount of energy that we can put into this and that is pretty encompassing. Not to, well, basically, yeah, if there's a slightest trace of this and that, the mind is lost in confusion. And again, it's not a matter of halting thinking, but it's a type of teaching that is equating that understanding non-permanence or emptiness is actually just a understanding of freedom from sort of the confines of a relative view. That's all it is. It's the freedom from substance, basically, that we get caught up in different ways, we grasp after different things. So again, I bring this up and then I'll repeat a line from the Shin Ming I said before. Indeed, not hating the world of the senses is identical with true enlightenment. So as we look at the teaching of non-substantiality here, our ideas of this and that, the world, different things, a fragmented world of many different objects. That is the world of the senses. So if, I guess I'm bringing this up in that we are not trying to say that the world is nothingness or it should be disrespected in any way, because the Shin Ming is saying not hating the world of the senses is identical with true enlightenment. So the practice, the Buddha Dharma is equating to us is there's a way of understanding truly what is happening. To understand truth is to understand experience. It's not to have ideas of this and that or believe in one thing or another. It's to live life according to how the relative world is showing up. And it's to be at ease in the relative world. It's not to hate the world of the senses or hate anything or make judgments or counter philosophies or anything along those lines. That's true enlightenment, just to understand clearly what's happening, to understand the truth of experience. Also, the Shin Ming says, in emptiness, mind and thing are indistinguishable, and each contains within itself the whole world. You'll run across this quite a bit in Dogen's teachings, where like he'll talk about the moon in a dewdrop. So this very, what seems like a very small thing is reflecting the massive, the moon. I mean, there's many different ways you could probably talk about this, but basically, the Shin Ming says that mind and thing are indistinguishable, and within each contains itself the whole world. So what we have here is actually totality. May show up in a dewdrop. We think of a dewdrop as a little piece of water that's H2O, there's molecules. Science tells us many things, that it's here for a while, then it disappears. But actually, the Buddha Dharma, the teaching of the awakened, say that whatever shows up, we have totality, completeness in whatever it is. Also says, in this suchness, nothing is separate, nothing is excluded. So again, in this relative world, to understand non-permanence, non-substantiality is to know that nothing is excluded either. I think this is a helpful teaching in many ways. A lot of the environmental problems that we have are based on a strong sense of different things. We'll want some things and we won't want other things, and going after those things that we want will actually cause problems for the environment. But here we have a particular type of teaching that is helping, at least in part, to understand that when we deal with one thing, we deal with everything. So if we have one piece of something that seems like trash and we throw it away, it does not go away. This teaching is speaking of something deeper than that, but I think it helps also in with some particular problems that we have in terms of not fully respecting different aspects of our life, or ways that we could improve on. There's, well, I was thinking about the relative aspect here. There was quite a bit of rain, some of the examples I was talking about with wind and so forth. When we were in the boundary waters, there was a lot of rain. Let's see, it was sort of vaguely raining when we started, and then it was pouring. But it was like the mosquitoes were horrible for pretty much the first full days. I remember I was trying to remember how many mosquitoes there were, and I thought, okay, if I held my hands about like this, that would be about, I counted them, about 10 mosquitoes right there. And for people who want to go camping who haven't done that much, I don't want to like dissuade you, because it just doesn't happen that often. But this time it was like the most intense I've seen. And I was thinking, well, when it was raining, if it really starts pouring, the mosquitoes will probably go away to some degree, right? And then it starts pouring, and the mosquitoes like weren't affected at all. So it was pouring rain, and like, how many are there, more raindrops or mosquitoes? I'm not sure here, but so it was rain. The trip was pretty nice. The rain sort of dropped away, but it was kind of overcast, and it was cool enough where we had long sleeves and long shirts. It had the head net, so actually the only annoying part was just the buzzing around your head, which is kind of more psychological than anything else. And then we actually were out in the boat on the lake. There's no mosquitoes out there quite a bit too. So, but on one of the last days, I just wanted to kind of mention this experience. So you got a bunch of rain during the trip, and then on one of the last evenings, we were on this big lake with a big, like a 200-foot sheer cliff, just a big, long lake. And then the sun broke through with a late evening orange light on the other side of the lake. It was just this big strip of orange. and then a huge spire of a rainbow shot up. And this is all, the rainbow is coming about because of the moisture that's building up over the last few days of us kind of suffering a little bit through all this rain. And then it comes up and curves over and it becomes a double rainbow. And then we're sitting in front of a big wide lake with enough distance where the rainbow came up and then and the surface of the lake was completely glassy. So the rainbow came down in the reflection of the lake. It was this massive sphere of a rainbow. So the top of the rainbow and the bottom of the rainbow. And we were just like in the perfect spot. If we were on the lake at an angle, you would not see that reflection perfectly. So it was just, I don't know what word. It was stunning. I had never seen anything like that. Just absolutely unbelievable. Kind of just sitting there with our jaw dropped. And again, it was, partially because all this rain had been happening over the last few days. So who's to really say what good and bad is? It's certainly, in cases like that, we can see that life has its depth because of this. Object is object for the subject, subject is subject for the object. And the Buddha is, I think, trying to help us in understanding that is the dynamic of life. That's what makes this relative world as rich as it does. But if we end up jumping after different things and jumping away, then that's dukkha. And if we do that, there's nothing wrong with that. He's just, the teachings are saying that we can notice what it is, and actually understand completely what this beautiful relativistic full picture is, and not be confused by it and not actually need to suffer. So there's some other way rather than just trying to replace the bad things with good things. That's pretty much all I have. I went a little longer than I thought, but there's a few minutes here in case anybody has any questions at all, or if you have any camping stories. Somebody experienced more mosquitoes? Have you?
Yeah,
Maybe.
I got some of those too, but yeah, no, I appreciate your talk. I had to it made me think I had to replace a outlet in our house yesterday, which is always a bit of a convoluted process with my skill set.
Mhm.
And so anyway, so I got the project done and I was like, oh, that's, the outlet's in there, it works. And that was my big project for the weekend. So Sunday's wide open after Dharma Field. I just go home, read a book, whatever. And like 2 hours later, my daughter comes over and she's like, I don't even exactly understand how this happened, but she had the light switch, the flicker switch in her hand. And she goes, Dad, I tripped and broke it off. And so I think what happened was she was running out of the bathroom for some reason, flipped the switch and tripped and just snapped it off. So I had like 2 hours of, peace there where I was like, oh, my projects are done. And then this other project came up. But as you pointed out in your talk, anything inherently annoying about having to replace the outlet today was what I brought to it. I wanted to do something else, and now I got to replace a switch.
Yeah.
And that there's nothing inherently bothersome about that, except for, like you said, that second arrow, what I bring to it. Yeah. So I appreciate your talk on that.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty funny how that shows up so often. Definitely. And it's an opportunity too. Suzuki talks about the weeds of practice. So when that annoyance comes up, just to be there, that's the opportunity to see. And in some ways, those little things are quite helpful, because you can sort of like put it in perspective easier, and you kind of understand that, yeah, why burden oneself with, just go ahead and do it. And so it makes it, it's easier in some ways, yeah, to kind of understand the grasping there. Thanks.
Thanks.
Okay, Mary? Yeah, Mary, go ahead.
Hi, thank you for this talk. This is amazing. Um, Maybe that's a second arrow, I don't know. Um, this morning I was looking at my phone on Facebook and there was an Ajahn Chah uh, post which says, look at the glass. I was drinking out of a glass of water. Look at the glass, as odd coincidence, and realize that this is already shattered and that no matter what it is you're looking at, it's already shattered. And that just felt so connected to what you were saying. I started to think about all the things I think about, good, negative or positive. And I thought, well, okay, they're already shattered. They're already gone. Good things, bad things. And I wondered if that thinking about the fact that they're already shattered is taking me out of the moment, I guess. I don't know. I just thought I'd share that.
Yeah, thanks for that. I don't know if it's the same thing exactly, but I don't, it was I think it was something like there was dirty dishes and I was sort of annoyed that they weren't there or they weren't clean. But then I realized, what would life be without utensils? So I'm like kind of um, you know, sort of just like annoyed that they're there and that they're dirty. I don't know if that's, similar to maybe the example that you bring where you imagine something gone and you can kind of feel appreciation for it. But yeah, it's there's a lot of different ways of kind of seeing impermanence, different examples and so forth. And I brought a couple examples to understand relativity and how that's sort of, you know, kind of funny how we see things so in such black and white terms. But it's also good, I think, to understand that um, examples are, and maybe you're kind of alluding to this in the end there, that they're limited in some sense, or really they're helpful in some ways, parables and so forth, but really kind of the rubber hits the road with practice itself to really reacquaint ourselves in each moment, have these stories and examples to help us. I think they kind of are a way of encouraging ourselves to practice, but really the true understanding of what's going on is of a practice nature. So, but yeah, it's an interesting image there. I hadn't heard that one before. I'd have to see that teacher's commentary to get a full picture on what that was, but yeah, I could see it's a striking image for sure. Thanks. And glad to have people on Zoom. We made it through this morning, through this storm without getting blacked out, which happened last Sunday. If you're curious why there was no Zoom, it was we were powerless here. None of the outlets were working here at at Dharma Field. So glad to have you back. Glad to have the lights on. Well, we're at 11:01, so we'll end it here. Thanks.